heavy.
Writers, like writers that try and like do weird things and sometimes fuck up and like aren't afraid to take risks, and it's not always the cleanest thing, and like writers that are moving between genres, and Scott McClanahan is one of my favorite living writers, like people that are very much like adopting a voice and persona in their work and like aren't afraid to play with style a little bit. So I don't know. It's a range. Like, I know it's not cool. I like David Foster Wallace. I love David Foster Wallace. I've always loved David Foster Wallace.
Oh, yeah. I want to talk about DFW with you. Yeah.
We can talk. Marguerite
Andy
Duras.
and I have gotten into some fights about DFW.
Well,
Really?
he's very contentious online too. If you scroll the timeline,
Contentious between us also.
there's a lot of lovers, a lot of
Say
haters.
more.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot. Where are we falling in the culture? Is everyone hate him still, or is it moved back to some degree of appreciation?
So I don't know.
Well, because since he's dead, and
I think we like him now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's always there's always that divide. He's a big dividing line in
I think there was a biopic, and now we like him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, dude.
Got it.
They did the movie. I think it was
Right.
Jason
did they do like
The
Jason
movie with,
Jason
what's his
Sudeikis?
face? Yeah,
It was
I saw
Siegel.
it.
It was
fine.
the
It's fine.
Muppets guy. It was the forgetting Sarah Marshall guy who played him.
Jason Sudeikis.
Jason
Siegel.
Yes.
Sudeikis is
Siegel.
They're the
Sudeikis
same
is the
guy,
guy
right?
that got cucked by Harry Styles. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. But yeah, DFW, he's a big, I mean, literally, if listeners will know this, if you hang out in any of the social media circles, online in the literary world, kind of, we've already said a little bit insufferable depending on your personality, but like, he trends. He's dead. He's been dead like 20 years now. And like, he trends like every couple months. He'll trend, and there's this huge blow up, and there's like, there's a bunch of people that say, that he's a genius, one of the greatest American writers there. And then there's people that he's a misogynist. He's Mary Carr's telling stories or whatever about how he was like rude or he was a fucking drug addict too. People forget that. So I mean, I'm sure he had mood swings and all that kind of shit. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to think of a kind of a contemporary or from the contemporary period writer who divides people more in DFW. And I like one of the things that, like I said, Lee and I hit it off kind of right away, because he's unafraid. She would just say, be like, yeah, I like DFW. And then, deal with that, bitch. Yeah, like, deal with it.
Also,
what are you going to
probably the
say?
one in the program who read Infinite Jest.
Yeah, probably no, there were a few that liked it.
They read it.
Yeah, the pretend to read stuff, but
The pretender. Yeah.
I know, yeah. It's like this. I've never seen, writers be that kind of loved and hated at the same time. I guess that means you're successful. I guess that means that like you're good if you have that many haters and lovers. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just curious. I always wanted to get your thoughts on DFW and how he's viewed, in the culture, largely the literary world. How you personally feel.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, anything. Go for it. Yeah.
I think when I started reading him, he was okay in the culture, and people still liked him when I was 20 and that worshipped. I think we were in the worship stage, and there was that cliche of like every guy you would date would bring up DFW or something. I never had that date. But yeah, that was the era in which I started reading his work. I believe he actually, right before he died, he got a fellowship at UVA and was going to go, but didn't go, obviously. So I think there was part of that lore there.
Because he famously hung himself, listeners that don't know. He printed out his last novel, put it on the toilet next to him, and then hung himself. So that's having a tragedy like that, the end of your life, kind of boosts your literary reputation. I mean, in the 20s, we romanticize suicide, we romanticize alcoholism in this field a lot, and I think that does. I mean, he wasn't stupid. I don't think that's why he killed himself, but I mean, I don't think he was completely ignorant to the fact that like you do build your legacy if you're a big star, and there's this tragedy at the end of their life or whatever. Like I said, I don't think I'm not saying he planned that. Like, of course not. Like, but yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're fine. I'm just trying to think of what story I first read. I think I read Good Old Neon, that story and that collection. I don't know who even put me onto it, but I think I appreciated again, like the ambition of it. Like, even if it wasn't always like hitting, it was like just something. I had never experienced anything like that as a young person or a young writer or someone who was trying to push themselves in that maximalist way. And it wasn't even a way I identified. Like, I am much more of a minimalist. I can't write long like that. So it wasn't like, oh, I commiserate or empathize from a artistic perspective, but it was just like, wow, this person is really taking chances and like being messy. And sometimes his work kind of sucks, I think. Like, and sometimes it's just brilliant. And, and I think there's sort of a variety of his work. You know, you have the sort of like very intellectual and heady stories, and novels, but then you have a story like Incantations of Burned Children, which I think was published in Esquire, and is a piece of flash fiction. It might be one paragraph that runs for 3 pages, and it's like lyrical and dense and fast and just one of the saddest things I've ever read. And like every time I read it, I cry. And like that's really what I want when I read. I want to like cry or like feel something. And that story does that for me. And so I just appreciate his range, and like, I don't know. There are just not many people like that. Not many creatives like that.
I mean, and he's smart, you know, I mean, like whether you like him or you hate him, I think, at least for me, like that was one of the things that, you know, you mentioned this really early on, like you were reading like you had something to prove when you were younger, right? And I think a lot of young writers, you know, even at least like into their 20s, 30s feel that way. I still feel that way. It's what we talk about on this podcast. It's why we have it, you know, we're like ashamed of all the things we haven't read. And I think with DFW, the thing was like everyone understood how smart he was. He wouldn't have been such a massive phenomenon had he not been so brilliant, I think. And so like whether or not you like him or not.
And it was high-minded.
It was like that thing. It was like, I have to have read David Foster Wallace or what am I trying to do? Like I have failed as a writer if I have not at least done that.
He had that like high-minded aspect, like you guys were saying, but there's like a little level of grunginess to him. And I get, okay, like the 90s and that, like he wore the flannel and the headband, the bandanas and shit.
The bandana.
I just said, I know he was going bald. I understand that and all that kind of stuff. That's a painful thing, dude. We talked about this on our own episode, listeners, where we get into hair plugs. I don't know how we got it, but it was like, you know, he had this grunginess on top of this high-minded literary stuff that you know, he's writing articles for the New Yorker, and then he's writing about doing heroin. Like he's just writing about these things. Like I know a lot of guys fall to, because the stuff he writes about addiction, the way he would write about sex, you know, from the male perspective and things like that. Like it's, and then also stylistically, nobody else is DFW, right? Like he is that guy. And then he had so many, like you said, the range. He was doing journalism. He was doing, the first thing I read by him was the Sophie Weiner, this dumb nonfiction class, and this is community college. And I remember I had a real hard time with that teacher. That teacher hated me.
I hated that teacher too.
Because
I made that very clear.
Always that guy that was, well, hold on, like you know, kind of in the class. But I read, Supposedly Fun Thing, I'll Never Do Again, that collection. And it is so unique. Like nobody else can do that. Like people copy it. They can try to copy it. They can, you know, be inspired by it. But like literally like DFW is so uniquely DFW that it's just, you know, and like Lee said, it's so rare. Like that's like, there are thousands of books published every year. Like we don't read most of them, right? But like when you read his, like that is an experience, like, you know, and we talk about this all the time. Listeners know like the visceral reaction Lee was described, like being moved to tears, being moved to laughter, being moved to any of these deep like resonance, this visceral resonance inside you as you read. Like that's your judgment marker, you know, like, and he is able to get that out of so many people in the positive and the negative kind of thing that like, yeah, what more could you ask for from like a literary icon? I mean, I wonder too, like, could that even be achieved now with the literary landscape and kind of the crumbling of the industry? But yeah, I don't know.
Well, he was like the sort of last iconic figure before that could just put out work and you would read his work and judge the work on the merits of the work. And now it's like you have an icon and you're like looking at their Twitter and their Instagram and all this other stuff you put out. And it's like, the work even becomes tertiary or something, or even less important than that, you know. And I don't know. I wish I was more of an adult, a cognizant being during that period where you could still just like write a book and like that was it or something, you know. It seems strange that was even a time.
Yeah, I mean,
resources, American shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.